everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Isabel and I am a young mom to my 1-year-old Amos. Today I wanted to talk about Lent, what Lent means, why we practice Lent, and how I plan to do Lent this year as a mother and a wife. Let's start out with what is Lent. So Lent is a liturgical season in the church. It lasts for 40 days, and during these 40 days we fast. This comes from when Christ, before his public ministry, goes in the desert and he fasts for 40 days. So we're taking his example and fasting for 40 days. It begins with Ash Wednesday and it ends on Easter Sunday. Well, technically it actually ends on Good Friday, but you generally don't end your fasting until Easter Sunday. The word Lent means spring, and I always thought that that was very appropriate since springs in New York are very muddy and gray and not the prettiest. And I think that reflects Lent very well, because as much as our springs aren't very pretty, we need them in order to get to summer. And it's the same with Lent. They're not, Lent isn't very fun. It's a time of fasting, but it's a necessary thing for us to do in order to grow closer to God. So let's talk about what it means to fast. Let's talk about fasting. So I feel like when people hear the word fast or fasting, they often think of just eating bread and water all day long. That's your only meal, or that you don't eat meals all day long and then you have like bread and water at the end of your day. That is fasting, but that's fasting in the extreme, and we are not asked to do this. We're not really expected to do this. You can, there are probably some people who do, but that's not, you don't have to be that extreme. Fasting just means that you willingly separate yourself from an object, a food, from time for yourself. It's separating yourself from something that you enjoy and doing so by choice. You know, if you're forced to do it, it's not really fasting. So I think it's important to understand why we do this, and fasting helps us turn away from the things of the world and from ourselves and turn back towards God. So in the world, there are a lot of things that distract us and keep us from taking time to pray, or from offering up our discomforts and sufferings for others. So Lent is a great time to pick something to fast from, because in that fasting, in the suffering of our fasting, we can grow closer to God and unite ourselves with his suffering during his passion. So Lent is a really important season. These 40 days are really important for any Christian Catholic wanting to get closer to God. And I always kind of look forward to it with a kind of like, yay, it's Lent, and also like it's Lent. Because you are fasting and you're separating yourself from things that you enjoy, and it can be very tricky. So let's talk about the different types of fasting, because I feel like most people just think about taking food or objects out of their daily lives. A very common one is to not eat any sweets, which is, like, I'm not bashing it. It's a great idea. Like, talk about it being good for your mind, your spirit, and your body, to take sweets out of your diet. I think it's really important when we think about how we choose to fast, is to think, is this going to help me grow closer to God? Is it good for my health? Is it good for my mind? Because you don't want to damage your health or your mind during your fasting. Because if you're damaging your health and your mind, you might not be able to do the things that you need to be able to do. If you're a teacher and you're damaging your health, how are you going to teach your students? If you're a mom especially, you shouldn't pick anything that would be damaging to your health or to your mind, because you need to be able to be present to your children and to your husband. So those are important things to think about when we choose what we're going to fast from. So different types of fasting, and so maybe some things you haven't really thought of, is you can take something out of your diet, you can choose to fast from a certain food. I think it's a simple one, pretty good one to do, because it can teach self-control, which is good for your mind. It's good for your body to sometimes fast from the less healthy foods, and in fasting, it is good for your spirit and your spiritual life. And I think it's really great too, because there are different levels that you can do it. You can choose to just not eat desserts during Lent. You can choose to go full blown and do absolutely no sugar during Lent. Or you can choose just a certain type of food that you're not going to have during Lent. Something that you enjoy, but you step away from it. I feel like that's a really good one. You can also do this with objects, game times, things like that. Maybe you choose, there's a certain book series you choose not to read. You might really enjoy it. Maybe it's something that you gravitate towards and you are always rereading it. You choose, okay, during Lent I'm gonna not do that, and maybe instead I'll read like a spiritual book. Or maybe you take it a step higher and you fast from reading any fiction and you just focus on spiritual reading. In gaming, maybe when you get on your computer, you don't get on the internet, and you only play games that don't necessarily need the internet. Or maybe you don't get on your computer at all during Lent. There's different stages of fasting and different ways that we can make it more intense or a little bit more laid back, and it's important to think about what you can handle when you choose what to fast from, because you don't want to pick a goal that you just can't achieve. Maybe you, like in the sense of food, you choose this Lent I'm not going to eat desserts, and you build up your self-control and your relationship with God, and receive graces from that, from choosing that fasting. And next year you might be able to take it up a notch. Or maybe you'll have had a really hard year, or you've got a lot going on, and it's not the time to apply heavy fasting on yourself. So you think about the different levels of fasting and where you're at in your spiritual life and what you are capable of doing. You don't want to overwhelm yourself. Another thing to think about with fasting that I feel like we miss a lot is fasting from personal time. You can, instead of, maybe you were going to this afternoon sit down and read your favorite book or scroll Instagram or whatever. And instead of doing that, you could choose to sit down and pray, and giving up the time you would have spent on yourself, and you're giving it back to the Lord and saying, instead of spending this time on myself, I'm going to spend it speaking to you and hanging out with you and really focusing on you. You can take things away or you can add things. And in adding things, you're taking away the time that you would have spent on yourself. And you're adding things that turn your eyes to God. And whenever you choose what you're fasting from, it should always be something that is helping you focus on God more. There are a lot of distractions in the world, and it's different for everybody what distracts them from focusing on God. So whatever you choose for fasting, whether it be something super hard or a little bit more laid back, whatever you need to do in your life, in your spiritual journey to take a step closer to God this Lent, is what you need to pick as something to fast from. The Lent lasts for 40 days, but we don't count the Sundays, because Sundays are days of celebration, they are days of rest. You are not required to keep your fast on a Sunday. Now, for some people, you might choose to continue keeping your fast on a Sunday. It's not like there's no hard fast rule about this, about being like, you can't fast on Sunday. You can. And some people find that by stopping their fast on Sunday, it makes it harder to continue it on Monday. So that's important to think about, like if you choose not to fast on Sunday or not. The other things about like choosing that, adding prayer to your life is what you're going to be doing for this Lent. I feel like it doesn't really make sense to not do that on a Sunday, because Sunday is also a day of prayer. But yeah, so you can choose not to fast on Sunday, and that's totally okay. All of this Lent and fasting begins with Ash Wednesday, which is one of the only days where we as Christian Catholics wear an outward sign of our faith. So the day generally begins or ends, depending on when you go to Mass, with going to church, and during the Ash Wednesday service, you get a cross on your forehead of ashes. And this is from when, this is something that it's a tradition in the Catholic Church, which comes from when the Jewish people used to sprinkle ashes over their head in mourning. And so it's a day of fasting, and during this Mass, when you get the ashes on your forehead, they say a prayer, which is a beautiful little prayer. I don't remember the exact wording of it, but I'll tell you guys the gist of it. But they basically, when they put the ashes on your forehead, they say to turn away from your sins and back. I think they say the gospel or Lord, I don't remember. But it's a beautiful prayer, and I've always loved that moment of getting the ashes on your forehead. Sometimes they don't do a very good job of making it look like a cross. Sometimes it's just like a little smudge. But regardless, it's us mourning our sinfulness and having this outward sign that we have chosen to turn back to God. We are turning away from our sins and we're turning back to God. And that's what Ash Wednesday is about. And it's the start of Lent, where we are focusing on that whole theme of turning away from sin and back to God. So now that we've got all of the explaining of Lent and Ash Wednesday and how that all works, let's talk about what I plan to do as a mom and a wife. So I don't want to load myself up with a ton of fasting that I inevitably won't be able to do, because if you think about it, like as a mom, I don't always get a lot of sleep. I'm chasing my toddler around all day. And I have a lot of responsibilities to attend to as a mother and a wife. You know, it's my job to make sure the dinner is cooked. It's my job to make sure that I keep a tidy house. You know, my job's my choice. And these are the responsibilities that I have as the role that I have chosen in my life. And of course I have Curtis to help me, and Curtis is not shy of helping me around the house whenever needed, or with Amos when I need it. But I still do have these responsibilities, and I don't want to overwhelm myself, especially in days that I know that I will possibly be very tired. So I don't want to overwhelm myself with tons of heavy fasting. I think it's really important to, again, think about where you are in life. So as a mom, I have chosen a few simple things, and as a wife, I have chosen something to do with my husband. And I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but you can choose more than one thing to fast from. You can choose a few small things, you can choose a big thing, you can choose two big things. It's all about where you are in your personal journey with God, and what you think you can handle and what your lifestyle allows you to do. I have chosen this Lent that I'm going to give up sugar. This is something that we've done a lot in the past, like with my family. As a family, we would often give up sugar and sweets. So it's something that I'm very familiar with. I feel like I can handle. I also I'm at the tail end of my Whole30 diet, where we don't eat any sugar, grains, beans, dairy. There's a lot of things that you don't eat during this diet, and I have other videos where I talk more about it that you can check out, and I will link down below. I'm at the tail end of it, so I'm already quite used. For the past 30 days, I have not been eating sugar, so I'm already quite used to that. So I feel like it's not a big undertaking for me personally this Lent to continue not eating sugar, especially since I'm going to start adding those other things back into my diet. It's, I guess, even easier than I feel like Whole30 has been. So I'm sure and confident in my ability to spend the next 40 days continuing to not eat sugar. And of course, on Sundays, I might take a rest from that. It depends on how I'm feeling. Or if I feel like that is going to make this harder or not. I usually play that by ear. And of course, whenever you're taking a rest on Sunday, it is not a day, like, I'm not going to take this day to binge on donuts and candy and stuff. You know, by adding sugar back into my diet on a Sunday, I mean that I might put creamer in my coffee, or maybe put some jelly on my toast, you know, things that I wouldn't do because I'm not eating sugar. You know, just those small sweet things I might add back into my diet. But more importantly to me this year, I wanted to focus more on adding things to my daily life, and so I have decided that I am going to try and do some morning prayer. So there are prayers called the Liturgy of the Hours, which are typically done by people in the religious life or the priesthood. And so their scheduled times for prayer. And you have a book, which we call the breviary. And so there's morning prayer, there's evening prayer, and there's night prayer. I'm starting out small, and I'm just going to do the morning prayer. It's only like 5 minutes. It hardly ever goes over 5 minutes. It doesn't take long at all. It's something that I know I can comfortably do while sitting with Amos while he's playing or while we're eating breakfast. So I know I can find the times in my day to do morning prayer. In this area, I am giving myself a lot of grace because it's easy to get distracted, but I have taken certain steps to try to make it easier for myself to not get so distracted. I used to do it on an app on my phone, but I found that when I get on my phone, it's very distracting to not go to other apps before I go to my breviary app. So I am using my book that I have that I was actually gifted when I did Totus Tuus for the first year. When I was a Totus Tuus missionary, they gifted us all our own breviary. So I have my breviary book that I will be using, and that'll help me not get distracted on apps. You know, when you're planning your Lenten fast, it's all about setting yourself up for success, especially if you're a mother. Like, you got to think about, you know, what are your toddler's habits, and you know, when do you have the moments of time during your day, and you take those times. And so I'm planning to take that time and use it for prayer, and you know, whatever you end up choosing to fast, you take that time to fit in your fast. And again, I'm using really small things. This is only going to take up 5 minutes of my time, of my day, and I'm confident that I can get it done. Other things that I'm going to continue doing are working on my Every Sacred Sunday book, which I've shared before on my channel, but it's just a book that gives you the readings for every Sunday, and it helps you kind of walk through studying them and seeing if any part of these readings stuck out to you, and it gives you an opportunity to write about this and pray about it. So I'm going to continue using that book throughout Lent. I'm actually excited. They have a section dedicated to Lent, and it looks really fun. And the readings for Lent are always very interesting, and you can take a lot from them. As a wife, I wanted to do something with my husband. Growing up, I've always heard this when I was getting ready to get married and taking those, like, the preparation classes. They talk about this a lot. The closer that you and your husband grow to God, the closer you grow to each other. So it was really important to me this year as a wife, my first Lent being married, to try to do some sort of fasting with my husband. And so we decided together that we would do night prayer every night. It's a very simple 3-minute prayer, part of the Liturgy of the Hours, and we're going to attempt to do this every night together. And this brings us closer together because we're taking time to, we're going to remove time in our day to make sure that happens, as well as we're growing closer to God together. So I think that's really important and valuable. And so if you are married, I would strongly encourage you to consider that in your fasting, is to do something with your husband. Because the things that I have chosen are, I feel like, easy for me to do as a mother. They are not going to take too much energy. If I'm tired, you know, I think I can still accomplish these. You know, as a wife, I think that I can definitely accomplish adding this prayer into my life with my husband. Okay, another thing I really want to talk about Lent is it's so important to give yourself grace during this season. You are not going to be perfect when you start out. I mean, maybe you will. Maybe you will. I'm not going to be perfect when I start out. I know it. I know there are going to be days where I miss morning prayer. I know there are going to be days where Curtis and I are super tired at the end of the day, and night prayer just slips our mind. And it's important to not beat yourself up for those things, because God is very forgiving. He is very loving and very merciful, and he just wants us to try. Like, that is the important thing to him, that we try, and that we rely on him for our success. And even more so when we fail, we ask for his forgiveness, and we step back up and we keep going. And he will, if we continue to do that and rely on his mercy and rely on his grace, he will carry us through the rest of the way. So the last topic about Lent that I wanted to talk about is, how does Lent apply to my 1-year-old? And right off the bat, not much. We don't expect our 1-year-olds to fast. You're not expected to try any sort of fasting until you are reached the age of reason, and in the Catholic Church, we see that as around 7 or 8 years old. And then it's really up to your discretion about the child in question. And, you know, and when they reach that age and the time for Lent comes, it's about taking the time to have that conversation with them and say, like, you know, talk about Lent, talk about what it means, you know, see how much understanding of fasting that they can grasp. And then it's like the tiny, tiny little things for fasting for them. You know, maybe they choose to read a book about God every day, and maybe from their children's Bible they read a story about that every day. During Lent, you know, it's the tiny little things and baby steps for them. So as they grow older and mature in their spiritual journey, they will choose. They might choose greater fasting, or they might, you know, they will be able to start choosing the fasting that applies to them and where they're at in their life. As a parent, it's important for me to begin explaining to Lent to Amos now. And like when we go to Mass, pointing out the fact that instead of there being a lot of flowers on the altar and things being dressed in green for ordinary time, now we have dressed things in purple. And there might be a crown of thorns, and there's not going to be as many flowers. The altar will be very plain. You know, pointing these things out to Amos, even as a 1-year-old, and be like, saying things like, hey, look, you know, now they're wearing purple, or, you know, the priest's garments are now purple. Or, hey, look at this crown of thorns. This is the crown that Jesus wore when he was crucified. You know, saying those things to him, even though he might grasp a lot of it, he's not going to understand a lot, but making the habit to always explain to him these things and opening his mind to the possibility and to learning about God. Because my goal is I don't want Amos to be, you know, like 4 years old and suddenly be like, hey, you guys are talking about Jesus a lot. Who is this guy? I want him to not remember a time where he didn't know God, because I don't remember a time. And that was really helpful to me in my spiritual journey. And I was really, really fortunate for that. Like, I don't remember a time in my life where I did not know who God was. I remember learning more things about him every year and growing in my knowledge of him, but I don't remember ever not knowing who he was. And so my goal this Lent for Amos is to point out these things, the differences, because I did that in Advent. We read some more books about baby Jesus and talking about baby Jesus, and so this Lent I intend to do the same. I want to find some books. Like he has a children's Bible, so we're gonna like read the stories about Jesus and his crucifixion, and, you know, and talk to him and tell him, like, you know, Jesus did this really hard thing for us to help us to be happy. You know, and in very small baby terms, I can tell him these things. And the next year, I will, in very small baby terms, tell him the same things until he begins to understand and be able to ask questions as he grows older. So I'm very excited for this. But the most important thing that I can do for Amos right now is to be an example, to try my best to succeed in my fasting, to have him see that, you know, I'm taking time for prayer, to see in the evenings that me and, you know, my husband are taking time for prayer, you know, letting him see these examples of what Lent would look like. So as he grows, he will always have this example of how Lent should play out. But otherwise, Amos is expected to do nothing, just be his usual 1-year-old self, and grow in all the ways that he normally would. So I hope that answered some questions that you might have about Lent, gave you some ideas about what you might want to do for fasting this year. As always, please remember in your fasting to make sure that it is not harming your mind, it is not harming your body. You should always make sure that you are staying healthy and aren't doing anything too extreme. That is all for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. As well as if you want more daily content or would like to see cute pictures of Amos and videos of him growing up and developing, I have all of those over on my Instagram, which is linked down below, and you can follow me if you would like to. Thank you so much for watching.